Welcome back to the Speaking and Communicating podcast. I am your host, Roberta. If you are looking to improve your communication skills, both professionally and personally, this is the podcast you should be tuning into. Communication and soft skills are crucial for your career growth and leadership development. And by the end of this episode, please log on to Apple and Spotify and leave us a rating and a review. Now let's get communicating with Noel Koons all the way from Utah. Hi, Noel.
Hi, Roberta. Great to be here with you.
Thank you for being here. Welcome to the show. So Noel is the founder of Volition Counseling.
All
He
good.
helps adults, teens, families, and couples with their mental health needs, and so much more that we'll talk about on this episode. So, welcome. Tell us a little bit where you are and how it is there.
Thank you very much. Great to be here with you. And it's not a surprise that you, Roberta, are doing what you're doing and doing it like so well and connecting with so many people. So I'm glad to be one of the people you're connecting with. So what I do is I'm a clinical mental health counselor here in Utah, in the Salt Lake City area, and as mentioned, I work with adults, teenagers, their families. It's been interesting with COVID and how kind of the shift that COVID has made and how it's exposed kind of some mental health vulnerabilities
Mm-hmm.
or needs that that we we as people have. And so I'm working with a lot of individuals and families, trying to help them move through things with their mental health and so that they can be, well, grow as human beings, but also be better and do better and get their own needs met in relationships as well. So, and out here, um, I mean, sorry, hopefully you have a good editor. Like,
No, feel free. Go ahead. I usually interrupt, so I'm watching myself. I usually interrupt my guests while they're still processing their thoughts. So feel free.
sorry, sorry, I just had a brain freeze. So, but you had the question of, what's going on out here,
Mhm.
and I just had a brain freeze. I'm not sure how to answer that. So,
That's perfectly fine. Let me just clarify for our listeners when you said you're not surprised by what I do. Nola is an old friend. We met 20 years ago, I think, in South Africa. Was it 20
yeah,
years
about 20 years ago, yeah.
Right. So that's why, in case someone is wondering why you made that comment. And thank you, by the way. Yes, mental health, especially since COVID. When did you start your work through Volition Counseling?
I started Volition um, in 2015,
Mm,
and just kind of on the side, getting my own business going and being able to express some of my own ideas and approach, and working again with individuals and families. And all the while, I was working with primarily in more long-term treatment facilities, whether it's wilderness therapy or what's called residential treatment centers,
mhm,
where people come from all over the country and spend a decent amount of time really working on their mental health to expand and to grow in the areas that they need to grow in order to kind of move forward well in their lives. So that was more intensive, and now I've gone fully to focusing on volition counseling, but also do retreats from time to time, typically like a 5-day retreat
mhm.
here in the mountains of Utah near Park City. And so I do those from time to time as well. So it's nice getting a little bit of a different forum. yes, getting into the therapeutic depths in both arenas, so to speak,
Right.
but it's a little bit different. Being with someone for, many hours of the day for 5 days, or a group of people, versus typically working with someone once a week in therapy. So each one have their value, and I like a little variety in my life. So
Mm-hmm.
mixing that up here and there.
Yeah. Here's the thing about mental health, and I hope I'm not sounding ignorant. If you say, I feel that I have a mental health challenge right now, before it obviously gets worse and it's so apparent, what are some of the signs a person starts to experience, or how do you start to feel when you think something is not okay for me mentally?
Mm, great question. And I'm with you as in getting ahead of it.
Mm-hmm.
If we wait till something is full blown, then that's a pretty difficult time to begin working on it. And so seeing the early signs can be very valuable. Some of the early signs are, depending on the personality, it may be you may find yourself avoiding certain things. It may be avoiding um, social engagements. It may be avoiding work. It may be avoiding old hobbies that you've enjoyed.
Hmm.
Um, for specifically depression, people tend to feel what's called a lack of pleasure doing things that have historically given them pleasure. Like a great meal, or having a fun time at the game or the amusement park, or whatever people enjoy doing, where those things that previously gave them enjoyment have become they've just kind of flatlined,
Hmm.
like it's neutral. It used to be my favorite thing, and now
Yeah.
it's just humdrum. That can be an additional sign. We can also, another way we avoid, speaking of the avoidance, uh, we may avoid by like overworking or overdoing it, over exercising. And through that, we may be avoiding some important things that may be coming up, often emotional things that may be coming up. So we
Mm-hmm.
distract, right? We avoid through distraction by overworking, over exercising, over socializing, over binge watching Netflix or whatever it may be. And so we don't have to be or attend to that thing that is agitating us, right?
Mm.
So these are a handful of kind of the early signs for adolescence, if I can touch upon that.
Yes, please do.
For all the parents out there who they may be concerned about their teenagers, how they're doing, what's going on. Where um, I mean, you can look at a number of things. One is you may notice a drastic change in friendships. It's like, oh, all the friends you used to hang out with, you're not hanging out with them anymore, and so you're hanging out with a new group, or you're spending a lot of time at home, which for teenagers developmentally, they are their world should be expanding, right? Including
Yeah.
and especially socially, right? Expanding and friendships and relationships with romantic potential. Like there's adolescence is this time of expansion.
Mm-hmm.
And so if they're spending a lot of time at home, hunkered down, perhaps on their phones, then that can be that can be a sign that they may be struggling in some way. They also may be you may notice things at school, like if they've been a strong student, they may be shakier, or getting lower marks.
With the grades. Mm.
Yeah, grades, right? See what I did there? I went to marks
You
because
spoke
that's a
South
South
African.
African. When, but yeah, here in the U.S., grades or
Mm.
marks, whichever, both same
Mm-hmm.
thing. And um, let's see. The other thing just to be aware of, especially with adolescents, is um, I had it, then I lost it.
I'm sure it will come back. But yes, the avoidance. Does that mean every time you avoid something, it's because it's probably traumatic? It probably triggers something in you. Is that why you avoid it?
Um, Great question. Not necessarily. We may, of course, we're human beings, and we like some things and we dislike some things.
Right.
And to your, lending to your question, sometimes we dislike things because of a deeper, more important reason, or maybe we like things for a deeper, more important reason. And and so, yeah, there could be a number of things. The worst part about my job is paperwork. It's the paperwork I have to do, right?
Right.
And I don't, I haven't had any like traumatic experiences, really, um, that I can recall with paperwork, but it's just kind of the drudgery of it. And so, so I have some avoidance around that, but there's not necessarily anything traumatic with it. That
Mm.
said, certainly we can avoid things, especially thinking of it not necessarily as avoiding a specific activity, but we may avoid a certain emotional state, right? So,
Yes. How we feel when we do the thing we're thinking needs to be done.
yeah,
Mm.
exactly. Exactly. And anxiety is a common one, a common emotional state that with a common behavior of avoidance. You know,
Mm-hmm.
we may go to, I guess, like social anxiety as an example. So we may go to this social event, we may go out and we may experience some anxiety just being around people in a moderately chaotic place. And what what many people do is they like retreat,
Mm-hmm.
avoid, and then they kind of habitually avoid the distressful or anxiety inducing situation. But I'll propose that it's not necessarily the situation that is causing the anxiety. What I propose is the anxiety exists within a person because of possibly unresolved trauma, possibly, different things, and it manifests. It finds a target. So it may be, oh, I'm anxious about going to class. I avoid going to class, where the anxiety exists, and then it finds the target in, oh, class is making me anxious, or this social activity, or doing a chore, doing a task, doing my taxes. This is causing me to be anxious.
Mm-hmm.
It may be contributing in some way, but many of us have experienced anxiety, and then it finds targets. And
Or
so
the
the important
triggers. Mm.
yeah, so the important thing is to perhaps take care of ourselves. Avoidance is an adaptation. So it's not necessarily bad, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so, but the important thing is to perhaps dig in and understand why we're anxious. Why am I experiencing anxiety? And then, of course, in these different situations, but really doing some deeper work to understand that about myself rather than avoiding certain situations and making my world smaller and smaller, which
Mm-hmm.
tends to happen with anxiety. The world becomes smaller and smaller, um, but learning to do the deeper work.
Mm-hmm. Yes, because here's the thing about anxiety. One, as you mentioned, the different scenarios, it tends to be some things we may consider not such a big deal, and then you'll have is somebody being anxious about flying, which a lot of us are. I love traveling, don't get me wrong, but every time I go to the airport, there's always that little thing. But obviously,
Mm,
it's not to the extent that you described, which some of um, your clients deal with. Now, let's talk about how, when you realize that this has become a pattern in your life, what do you do next when you realize it's not just that I avoid this or this triggers something in me? I've realized that it's really becoming a pattern. I need to do something about it.
mm. Yeah, great question. That's where I invite like everyone I work with to to try to practice bringing a heavy dose of curiosity to their own experience,
Mm,
and versus, and I can unpack that a bit, versus we often are very self-critical. If we find we're habitually doing things that aren't healthy or aren't working for us, or we may feel shame around it, like,
mm.
oh, we're often self-critical. We criticize ourselves. Oh, I'm so stupid. I'm doing the thing again. Oh, how did I get here? I'm in the same pattern, you
Cycle,
know?
yeah. Mm,
And so curiosity, sincere curiosity is the antidote to criticism or being judgmental. So if we can be curious with ourselves and say, ask sincerely, why am I in the same pattern? Perhaps what's contributing to this? How did I get here? And what may I need to work on in order to disrupt the old pattern, the old habits that I have? And of course, it helps to do that with another person. You
mm,
know, here's a little shameless plug, like with a therapist, right?
yeah.
Where you're gaining insight, because all of us do foolish things, silly things,
We all do.
objectively. We
Yeah.
all do. We all do. And we all do them for good reason. They're good, solid, understandable reasons why we do the things we do once we take the time and effort to actually understand ourselves and others. But it takes work and time in order to do that, in order to understand, why am I doing the same thing? Why am I always getting into choosing the wrong partner in a relationship? Why am I always
Because dating
um,
sucks. I'm kidding.
yeah, there it is. There's the
No,
simple
no, no, no,
truth.
no. No, no,
Enough
no.
said.
Don't listen to me.
Enough said. Yeah.
Mm,
Or why am I always the doormat at work? Why don't I share my opinions? Why am I why do I talk over people, or why do I get so angry with these little things, or whatever it may be? Those are
mm,
great questions if we come with sincere curiosity. I propose they're not great questions if they're just criticisms wrapped in wrapped in a question, but they're actually a
right. Because
criticism.
you feel worse than, yeah. Yes. Now let's talk about, on your website you see you write about emotional and psychological needs. Is there a difference between the two? And then we'll get to the sixth, psychological needs.
No, just the same. Yeah, same thing. It can just be used interchangeably.
Hmm.
So psychological needs, emotional needs, the same thing. I prefer psychological needs because it tends to have it's more inclusive.
Right.
Psychological can include mental, emotional, perhaps even spiritual um, needs that we may have. So
Mm. And are they common no matter which part of the world you're from, no matter which culture you're from, or are they psychological needs specific to Americans that as a South African I might not be familiar with or relate to?
Mm. We'll see right now if they resonate with you. But in my experience, they fit. They're very human,
Mm,
for not just American or Canadian or South African or Korean or elsewhere, that these fit us as human beings. These are essential for us to function well in life and to feel as though we're doing well and possibly even thriving.
mm-hmm.
And so I'm happy to list these and dive in
Yes, please.
if
I was
now's
going to
if,
ask you next.
if,
Yeah.
if now is a good time.
Mm-hmm.
And so as I list these and unpack these, you know, your your podcast is about speaking and communicating,
Right.
effectively, clearly in a variety of settings, um, and including at work and professionally.
Mm-hmm.
And these are these psychological needs are kind of the foundational piece for effective communication.
Right.
And so I'll jump to these so I'll list these probably several times in the next few minutes, just because repetition helps us learn.
Exactly. Yeah.
So the first is understanding, where I have a sense of being understood, right? And it's a subjective sense, as in I have this inner sense where I
Mm-hmm.
either feel understood or misunderstood or partially understood. But the first psychological need of feeling understood. Second, feeling accepted.
Mm.
Third, connection. Okay.
Okay.
Fourth, a sense of safety and security.
Mm-hmm.
Fifth, a sense of power and control. And sixth is a sense of mastery.
Okay.
Mastery being I sense that I'm good at some things in my own life. Like, oh, I'm good at that. I have a sense of that. And also this sense that, oh, if I work at something, if I study, if I practice, I can improve.
Yeah.
I have this sense that I can do these things. I can grow at it. And so all of these are subjective within us, as in you can tell me all day that you totally understand me as I'm speaking, but I won't truly believe you unless I sense that within
It
myself.
starts with you first.
Exactly.
Mm.
Exactly. And with these 6 psychological needs, we ideally meet them both personally and interpersonally.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I mean by that is going with acceptance. So one of the psychological needs is acceptance, and that's where can I practice self-acceptance? Can I accept these parts of myself? Like I mentioned, avoidance, right? Repeatedly.
Right.
That's one of my adaptations. One of these things I'm working on therapeutically, right? I have this avoidance of certain things. And so can I accept these parts of myself? Not necessarily that I agree with them or want them to stay the same, but I can accept them, right? As they
Mm-hmm.
are. And then of
To
course,
let go of judgment of those things in you.
to let go of judgment. Yeah, well
Mm.
said. Well said. And
Okay.
then of course, interpersonally as well, where especially by those we care about. It's like we want acceptance by those we care about. And so both personally and interpersonally, that's how we come to thrive in life, and how we
Mm-hmm.
feel like content. And that's also how we may have, like, on a resume, we may have all the things. We may be, we all hear about people who are super wealthy, super well connected, super accomplished, etc., who are maybe severely depressed or who have drug and alcohol issues or are otherwise struggling. And the place to look is, how are you doing with your psychological needs? That's
Mm-hmm.
that's essential. And so with speaking and communicating, whenever we're communicating something and making requests with our friends, our family, our coworkers, whoever it may be, foundationally, are we helping them, our teammates at work or whoever it may be, are we helping them to feel understood? Are we
Right.
helping them to feel accepted? Are we are we feeling connected with them? Do they feel safe and secure in this space and relationship? Do they sense that they have a sense of power and control, both personally and interpersonally, you
Mm-hmm.
know? And then a sense of mastery. It's like, oh, you're growing. You're growing as a person, and and you can practice your strengths and be encouraged to do that. And so these are the
Mm.
understanding, acceptance, connection, safety slash security, power slash control, and then mastery, just to
Mastery.
repeat.
It's funny you said that because I'm thinking, if I don't have a Lamborghini, does that mean that something is missing in my life? And should I feel like there's a
Of
need?
course, you must have a Lamborghini.
I need a Lambo. And here's the interesting part about these needs, like you said, if you think of and I know when you're in South Africa, you went to all parts of my country, just like any other country. You've got rich people, wealthy people, you've got middle class, you've got ones who are struggling. And sometimes it amazes people that people who literally have nothing materialistically are some of them are some of the happiest people. I mean, they may go to the city and feel like my life is missing something. But when they're back in their villages, there's that level of happiness that some of us, even city dwellers, don't experience sometimes.
Yeah, definitely. And I experienced that, in Umlazi and Guatabeca and elsewhere, where people who are, what can we say, lower on the socioeconomic, on their socioeconomic
Working
status, people,
class, what you consider working class in first world countries, yes.
yeah, and who, but they're well connected in their communities. They're
Mm-hmm.
they're often family oriented. Their doors are often, open,
To
in a
the
manner of speaking,
neighbors,
like to neighbors.
yeah.
And so, with your experience, I mean, you've lived in, for decent periods of time, in 3 different countries, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if I remember correctly, of course, growing up in South Africa, and
Yes.
then South Korea,
Mm-hmm.
and now in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, with your experience in these countries, did you experience, I mean, with the question and what you're describing, were some of these people who did not have Lamborghinis, or maybe who didn't have a car, a vehicle at all,
Yeah.
you know, did you see people who were getting their psychological needs met, through a sense of being understood, accepted, connected, safety and security, power and control and mastery? And what was their life like? How were they doing as far as their well-being?
As we mentioned earlier, so I grew up in apartheid. It ended when I was 18. So the first 18 years of my life, I lived the names that you mentioned earlier. That's what they call the township, equivalent of what they call the hood in America. And so the shops were very far. You needed your dad to come back from work and take you guys if you have a car, unless you take the bus. to do groceries. But the little things before the end of the month for the big family groceries, if you run out of sugar, if you run out of rice, whatever it is, beans, you take a cup and your mom says, go to the next door neighbor, and they happily give you a cup of beans that your mom's going to cook for you for dinner. And then on a different day, they're going to send their kid to your house for a cup of sugar because they run out of sugar before the end of the month and dad gets paid and we go do groceries. So that level of connectedness, community spirit, and more than anything, there's no sense of judgment, because I feel that the more materially we achieve, there's always a lack of satisfaction with what we have. We always feel like we could have more and do more and earn more. And so if you live in that environment, you don't have that, I just gotta keep doing more. I gotta keep doing more. Thing. You are very quick to be content, if that makes sense.
That makes a lot of sense. And if I'm hearing you, a lack of judgment, or
Mm-hmm.
perhaps in other words, acceptance of the other, acceptance of the circumstances, acceptance that, oh, today
Not.
you need a cup of
Mm-hmm.
beans, and then tomorrow, next week, I'll need a cup of sugar or some potatoes or whatever it may be.
Yeah, and we don't judge each other to say, you're so poor, you can't afford beans. No, it's not that. And we focus on different things, on different human connections during that era, rather than what do you have? Let me compete. What do you have in your house that I don't have? We did not have that. It's not even something that crossed our minds. I don't know if that makes sense. Because we were focused on different things. It's like, even if you go to those villages today, you know how sometimes people say, I'm going to feed the starving kids in Africa. We were not starving, but we were, and they go to those very remote villages out where literally it's by the border of another country. And those people are happy. They don't have much, but they're happy. And you
Yeah.
can see they're not faking the happiness. You know what I mean? And so back home, I remember when a few years ago, and we'd hear things like, this celebrity had anxiety, that Hollywood person is committed suicide. You know what I mean? We barely have low suicide rates. And we used to say ourselves, with all that they have, what could they be missing for them to get to that level?
That's a great question.
Because we didn't have that with us, and we didn't have much tangibly to make it. So it's back to what you said. These psychological needs are internal, and they start with you internally. Because no matter it, if you don't accept yourself, no matter how much acceptance I display of you, it's not going to be received, because it hasn't started with you first. You're not even going to recognize that Roberta is acting like she's accepting me right now.
Hmm. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. Well said. And if we don't accept ourselves and all our parts, all our whole selves, then we often play a role, or we put on a mask of some sort,
Mm-hmm.
and where I can show up, well, growing up male in the United States, as an example, it was not socially acceptable to express sadness, embarrassment, disappointment, or emotions like that. That was not socially acceptable. Do you know what was socially acceptable growing
Yeah.
up as male in the United States? To show anger, right?
Huh.
It's like you can be angry, but if you're sad and you're crying about something, or disappointed or embarrassed, oh, there's like, don't do that, especially in sports growing up. It's like,
That's
oh,
interesting, because sometimes anger does lead to you crying if you feel like, oh, I'm literally blowing up right now.
hmm, yeah, but it's, like, males were showing anger, expressing anger was socially acceptable. But then on the other side, for girls growing up in the United States, showing anger, not acceptable. Like the social message was often, you need to be nice, and being angry is not being nice, right? So you can be
Hmm.
all these other emotions, but you can't be angry, right? And so and that's not accepting, right? Not accepting the emotional state. Like, of course girls get angry. Of course
Yeah, we
boys
all
get
do.
get
Mhm.
embarrassed. But if we don't allow them to be fully expressive, then we may shut down these parts of ourselves, these important parts of ourselves, and we become less whole. And then we learn that we can only be accepted if we're nice, or if we're getting good grades, or if we're performing well at work. That's how I get accepted. That's how I get love.
It's
But
conditional.
which is a sad message. That's a hard message that many of us are dealing with. Many of us are dealing with. All of my clients have, and I deal with well-functioning people. You know, I deal
Mm-hmm.
with I deal with people who are doing well at work. They're in relationships. They're, all these things. From the outside, it looks like they're succeeding well, and they are to a great degree.
Right.
And there are some deeper, more important things going on. And that's my in my opinion, that's all of us. All of us. Those of us who excuse me, we may appear to be doing well and all of that, we still have many things going on and to work through. And so meeting these emotional, these psychological needs, again, both personally and interpersonally, is is like the game changer. And if I
And
may,
sorry,
oh
go ahead.
yeah, go ahead.
No, your turn. You're the guest. If you
I'll
wanted to say something.
I'll just carry on. I'll be long-winded. But understanding our psychological needs, it's often helpful to look at the opposite. Look at the opposite with these 6 psychological needs. So understanding acceptance, connection, safety, security, power, control, and mastery. To look at the opposites, right? What's our experience with feeling or having a sense of being misunderstood? Do we have any
Right.
experiences there? What about, instead of being accepted, being rejected or being left out, you know? Or instead of connection, loneliness, like I'm the odd one out. What are our experiences there? When, at what time, or what are our experiences when we have not had our psychological needs met well? And we all have, as in we all have missed out at times on getting our psychological needs met.
That's
Safety and
true.
security, have we had times where we felt very unsafe or insecure or in danger? Or power and control, have we felt out of control, or as if we're being controlled? Or the sense of powerlessness, right? Or instead of a sense of mastery, have we had a sense of failure? Have we had a sense of chronic or ongoing failure? Like, whatever I do, it doesn't matter. No matter how hard I work, I can't budge. I can't move forward. I can't get over this hump. And these are, looking at the opposites is very important, because that's, that's the recipe for traumatic experiences,
And
you
that's
know?
when you actually, if you ask the right questions, you might peel the layers and start to get to the root cause of whatever it is you're feeling.
Yeah. And again, that can be very helpful. It can often be hard to do just as an individual, although meditation and spending time in nature and sometimes prayer can be helpful with that. But if we're really going to do that work, it's often interpersonal. It's like with someone else. um, if nothing else, a confidant, but someone who can guide us somewhat and be curious with us and help us explore these areas and unpack these areas with acceptance, understanding, and connection.
Right. Which begs the question, if those are the challenges you are having internally, how do, because you counsel couples, when they come to you, how do they cope if one or both are struggling with the internal psychological needs we've spoken about, even if the other spouse is busy giving you that stuff and
Mm.
trying to fulfill those needs?
With couples work, my opinion and experience, couples work must have individual work. Each of them must be doing their or have done a significant amount of individual work where they can come together as a couple and do their work, some of their work together. But
Right.
if they're not either somewhat mature enough or therapeutically advanced, if those terms don't sound too pretentious,
Okay, we fully get you, Noel.
if they're not therapeutically advanced enough, then the same patterns that they experience in their relationship they'll experience that in the therapy office. But if they do their own work first, it can be very much complemented as couple as they do couples work. But to your point, you know, or to your question, that's where that's where we can reflect and question, am I am I getting my some of my am I fulfilling my own psychological needs to a great degree? Or am I relying fully, like very heavily, on this other person to fulfill all of my psychological needs? And that can be a tricky kind of imbalanced situation. If I'm relying all on you to help me feel understood, accepted, connected, safe, secure, power, and in control, and then mastery, then that's too much responsibility for you, and that's a recipe for you to fail in some way, and for me to crash and perhaps become resentful towards you because you're not fulfilling all my emotional needs. And
Mm.
so,
So
again,
in a
both
way,
personally and
it's
interpersonally.
so in a way, sorry to interrupt, you know. In a way, it's kind of not my spouse's job to fulfill those needs if I don't work on them myself first to feel fulfilled before they come into the equation.
Ideally, I'm working a lot on that on my own. And then certainly having contact points. Do I want to feel understood by my significant other and accepted and connected? Of course. Of course. This is
Hmm.
so important in relationships. And whose responsibility is it to fulfill my psychological needs? Mine. It's my
Right.
responsibility to fulfill my psychological needs. And again, ideally, I'm doing that both personally and interpersonally, as in perhaps making requests. Hey, like if I have something important or something heavy that I'd like to share, I may come to you and say, Roberta, can I share something with you? And as I share it, will you just try to listen and understand?
Right.
And I can, and hopefully, that's a little request from my end, right? It's like, will you just try to understand me? It's like, will you help me fulfill at least one of my psychological needs of feeling understood?
Hmm.
And I mean, I know you're an excellent listener, And so
I wish, but thank you. Because the reason I'm wondering, and also let's talk about how you communicate to your spouse, because you know how sometimes you either, especially if you are angry by the time you make the request, you either say, "You never make me happy. You never do what I say," versus what you just said now, which is, "Will you help me get to this point?" Maybe it's the languaging of the request, not that it's a bad request at all.
yeah, certainly language is important, and you know that, and you're teaching that. The way we the way we request something matters. You know, that's the difference between demanding, you never do this for me, you must do this right now, and I don't care if you're doing whatever you're doing that's important to you, you need to be here for me right now. I mean, that's different than hey, are you willing to listen to me for a few minutes? I'm struggling with this thing that happened at work or whatever it may be. Like it's different, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I can also add that there's a reason why we may blow up or be frustrated or almost have, if this isn't too strong of a word, it's as if we're having a tantrum, you know, even as
Yeah.
adults. Like, oh, you're not doing this. You're always, you're never, you're this or that, almost as if we're having a tantrum. And that's often because if we're to that point, it it usually means, well, we may need a nap, or we may need a sandwich, or we may be deprived in some other essential way, including we may not be feeling understood. We may not feel accepted,
Accepted.
connected, a sense of safety and security, power and control, or mastery. And what happens, because it's similar, it's very similar. If we're sleep deprived, we'll get irritable, we'll make mistakes, we may become resentful, you know, if
And we
we're
only
really
blame it on
hungry.
babies.
and we, and we blame it on the babies.
Yeah.
They're a contributor to sleep,
Mhm.
sleep deprivation for sure. Um, but it's the same thing. If we're not properly nourished with our psychological needs, then we'll become resentful, we'll become desperate, we'll become perhaps bitter. If it goes on, if it goes on kind of chronically, we'll become nihilistic,
Mm.
right? Like it doesn't matter. Like who cares? Apathy,
Indifferent, apathy.
indifferent. Yeah,
Yeah.
because I've been trying so hard to get my psychological needs met, and nothing's working. Why would I keep trying?
Do your teenage clients know how to articulate their emotions like that when they come to you?
Mostly no. However, and this I'm generalizing.
Hmm.
Um, Adolescent girls tend to be more articulate and more in tune with their inner state. Boys tend to have a harder time with that, both understanding their inner state, their emotions, and being able to articulate it. So
Mm.
that's a generalization, but you know,
The law of
develop.
averages say it's more the girls being able to say, "This is my problem. This is how I'm feeling."
Yeah, yeah. Girls
Hmm.
tend to be more introspective and articulate,
Okay.
and so they tend to get there a bit quicker than boys.
Right. Any last words? Anything I haven't asked you you were hoping to share with us today?
Let's see. Yeah, actually, just emphasizing the same points, but perhaps in different areas of life,
Hmm.
right? If we're feeling worn out, if we're feeling exhausted or powerless or just unfulfilled, a great place to start is with the question, are my psychological needs being met well? Are they being met well? Am I nourished psychologically? Again, I know I'm on repeat here, both personally and interpersonally. Do I feel understood in my life? Do I feel accepted by those I care about and who care about me? Do I feel connected with them? Do I feel connected with myself? Do I feel connected perhaps with something greater than myself? Do I feel connected with perhaps nature or a greater purpose or the divine or whatever it may, or the universe or whatever it may be? And do I feel safe and secure in my own life? Do I feel secure in my relationships? Do I feel safe, like I can make a mistake and
Mm,
still be okay in a relationship where I don't need to be perfect in order to be accepted? And do I feel a sense of power, over my own life in healthy ways? Again, both personally and interpersonally. Am I connected and working as a team or at work or in my community or with my family or friends? Um, and then mastery, of course. It's like, do I feel like I'm overall succeeding in my own life? Am I growing? If I want to do better, do I have a sense that I can put effort into that and grow and make improvements and move toward that goal and do better and be better and and all of that? And so this is the food. This is the psychological food. This is the psychological sleep. This is the psychological oxygen that so many of us are deprived of, and many of us are trying to fulfill that need through like social media, which is like trying to fulfill our nutritional needs by eating cotton candy for the most part.
wouldn't that be nice, but okay.
Yeah, I'll just get nourished by eating cotton candy,
I'd
where we
love
may,
for my nourishment to come from cheesecake, but I know the effects of that and how much it
yeah,
would work against me. Yeah,
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 where we know we're getting something, but it's not nourishing. It's not filling us up. It's not taking care of us, and then we become malnourished and desperate, and we may try to get our emotional needs met in unhealthy ways, through
yeah,
substances, through unhealthy relationships, through uh, a desire for power and control. And I know I'm being long-winded, but focusing on power and control for just a second, where we've seen this play out horrifically and tragically throughout human history, where people try to fulfill this need of power and control over other people,
right.
including with apartheid and and in many ways, you know, exercising power and control where it's unequal. It's like we have power over you. We have control over you. We feel powerful because we we write it into our law that we are better than you.
Mm-hmm.
Or in the early days of the United States, that that people of African descent are only 3/4 of a person, or that women are only 3/4 of a person. This is like exercising power over. This is an incredibly unhealthy way to fulfill our emotional needs. Um, but this is what we do if we're not careful. Like
Right,
us as human beings, it's this incredibly important responsibility to fulfill these psychological needs in healthy ways, both personally and interpersonally, because history is full of examples of fulfilling trying to satiate our emotional needs in incredibly unhealthy, violent, murderous ways. So I can't
right.
emphasize the importance enough of taking care taking care of these, making sure we're nourished, eating our psychological kale and blueberries and
I love
and
that.
and pure water, you know. So that's my long-winded last rant, I suppose. Thank you for indulging me.
Wisdom from Noel Koons. Oh, we needed to hear that. We certainly did. Thank you for those words of wisdom. My friend of 20 years, Noel Koons, who is the founder of Volition Counseling, helping teens, couples, adults, and families with their mental health needs. Thank you for all those psychological needs, dietary requirements that we will be working on. We appreciate you being on the show today.
Thank you very much, Roberta. Pleasure to be here with you, and thank you to all your listeners as well.
My pleasure as well. Before you go, where can we find you online?
Yes, at volitioncounseling.com, and perhaps you'll provide a link because that's
Yes,
a long, difficult one to spell, but I can spell it if you want.
I will put it on the show notes. Yes.
Yeah, and so that's my website. That's where you can also find more information about psychological needs, including suggestions on how to fulfill these in healthy ways, both personally and interpersonally, with a handful of suggestions for each. And so, or you can email me at Noel, spelled Noel, at volitioncounseling.com, and I'll be happy to speak with any of your listeners further about this topic or otherwise. So
Quick question. Since COVID, do you also do online consultations?
I do, yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
COVID kind of really opened the world up to more video like this, right? So
Mm,
yes, definitely.
I'll put that on the
Through,
show notes as well. Okay.
yeah, happy to connect through video. Yeah.
Excellent stuff. Thank you, Noel. Don't forget to
Thank you again.
subscribe. My pleasure. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a rating and a review on Apple and Spotify, and stay tuned for more episodes to come.